So I'll start with a really quick introduction. My name is Julia Kuo. I graduated in 2007 with a major in illustration and also in a business school in marketing. So I've been a full-time freelance illustrator since 2009. I publish children's books. So I had two coming out this year. One just came out and two out next year. And I'm also an editorial illustrator. So my client list includes places like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Harper's Magazine, ProPublica, and others. I also dabble in artist residencies when I can. And so right now I'm doing one with U Chicago. It's at the Gray Center for Arts and Inquiry. And on the side, I like rock climbing and doing a little bit of mountaineering, which seems irrelevant, but I will get to it later. So I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen. I just put together a very basic PDF so that you have something to look at. So I know this is called How to Make Money Freelancing. But honestly, my biggest takeaway is that money is certainly not the most important thing in a freelancing career. It's certainly vital, but success means so much more than that. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you how I got here and what my journey has been like, and hopefully that will have some things that you can apply to yours as you go along. So how I got started freelancing. I actually started working full-time for American Greetings in 2007. It was my first job out of college, and I went there straight after graduating from WashU. I was a planner, which is something in between a designer and illustrator hybrid. And so my plan was always to freelance full-time, but John Hendricks, whom you just heard from, was my professor. And he gave me the advice that I should go and work at American Greetings for a couple years, learn how to be a good employee, gain experience from seeing how a major card company does it. This is the company whose cards you see in Target. So they're probably the second to Hallmark. And living in Cleveland, I was able to live very simply. So I did that for 2.5 years and knew that I was going to have trouble pulling the plug because I had a few freelance clients at the time, but certainly nothing to make a living off of. And so the way I got myself to quit was I used up all my vacation and then I booked a non-refundable flight to Australia that I had to go on. So it was a successful way to quit. So I got lucky with a few connections. Through personal connections, I was able to illustrate my first book. And from that, I got my book agent, which turned out to be pretty important in my career. I also started my own small business called the Nimbus Factory. It was a paper goods company that we no longer run. But for a couple of years, we were making our own products. So we had our own inventory and we were shopping around our products. So what specific things do you do to get your first clients? So I think the first thing is that a portfolio site is not even up for discussion. I know that this group is a little bit wide ranging in terms of what your disciplines are, but I think that kind of applies across these creative disciplines. And so you have to have a functioning website that looks professional. It has to look like it has a heartbeat. It's a reflection of you. It's just like if you showed up sloppily dressed to a meeting, it wouldn't reflect well. Second, you just want to be seen in as many places as you can. So whatever that means, whether it's joining competitions, finding ways to have your work published in zines, being featured on blogs or on other people's accounts. This is how I got my first editorial illustration commission, and that was for the New York Times. And from then, every project I got could literally be traced to the project before. In the beginning, I made it a point of asking every client how they heard about me. And it was very linear. I think work begets work, and that was certainly the case for me. From there on, I think that one big thing is just to be prolific. In your early 20s, you don't have as many responsibilities, so you have the time to work hard, and this is the time to do it. So in that time for myself, I did gallery shows. At the time, Renegade Craft Fair was something that was a little bit bigger. And John talked about mailers. I don't personally do them, but creating these things and just creating pieces that live out in the world are things that art directors do squirrel away. Later on, sometimes when I would hear from art directors, they would actually open with the line, "I've been waiting to hire you for a while. I saw your work a while ago, but I was waiting for the right project." So it really is true that, one impression, if your work can stick around and make an impression, then it can pay off later. You might just not be aware that they're holding on to it. Another thing that I know that people have echoed is just talking to and meeting people. Be nice to those around you. In the beginning, you don't know, it's hard to know who's going to be a good client and who's not. Art directors come with different quality, and it'll take a while to be able to vet who is pleasant to work with and who will make your life really hard. And so in the beginning, you'll have to take a few chances. You'll probably have to learn the hard way how different people work and how to kind of see those signs from the beginning. And remember that you're green as well. So people are taking a chance on you, and you're going to do some good projects and you're going to do some terrible ones. And I think that's just part of it. We all have those projects that we'd rather pretend don't exist. So as for social media, you have to make it look like you have a pulse. Instagram and Twitter are no longer personal things for people who freelance. They belong to the public sphere. I've had organizations just literally take things off of my Instagram and repost them, whether or not they didn't even ask for permission. And even now, when I do applications and when I do interviews, they all ask for my handles. So that is work now. You can keep things separate and have a private account, but be aware that people will look you up if you're trying to be a freelancer. So every now and then I write love letters to organizations. So I don't do mailings, but every year or two, there'll be an organization that I'm just dying to work with. And I'll just sit down and carefully craft an email and say this is who I am. This is the work I've been doing. I love you because, a little more professional than that, but these are the reasons that I would love to work with you. And so this is actually how I've gone and worked with some of my favorite clients, like Science Friday, which is a NPR science podcast. I told them I was so interested in these subjects, and I was actually able to work with them and kind of form a little bit of a relationship with them over the years. I also, because I love climbing, I've reached out to climbing magazines like Rock and Ice magazine and also sent them similar letters. Interestingly enough, for this particular magazine, I sent them one letter maybe 5 years ago, and the response was very kind of lackluster, oh, great, thanks for contacting us. And then I did it again last year, and the response was completely different, but from the exact same art director. He was thrilled that I'd reached out to him. So I don't know what changed, but it was worth trying a second time. Also weird that he didn't remember. Last thing, for illustration, repeat clients are not as relevant because, part of illustration is growing some breadth, right? But there are parts of illustration where it is pertinent. So publishing, those jobs are so big and you can work on multiple jobs with the same teams. And so I think there are things that help, like sending Christmas cards or even digital thank you notes. It doesn't take much effort, but it's a nice gesture. All right, so how do you bill clients? Is there a set price, or does it depend on the type of work or the type of client? So I think billing is super specialized to both type of work and client. As far as editorial illustration, you have relatively standard rates. From Vice to New York Times, for a normal standard illustration that's about this big, it would range from $300 to $500. But remember that everything is for a one-time usage. They are paying you for this image, to run this image one time. You own the rights to it, and you can actually resell it for almost the same price. So I've made an editorial illustration for one newspaper and then been contacted by another one and then resold it for the same price. As far as advertising, that's completely different. They're also they're purchasing the rights right off the bat. So you know that from there, it's definitely going to be a higher price. And the distribution is so incredibly broad. So that's also a reason that advertising prices are much higher and their budgets are a lot larger. Children's books range by the thousands based on your experience and whether or not you have an agent. It's been very mind-opening to me to compare with other illustrators and even writers how much they get paid for children's books. There's just an incredible range. And this is a conversation for later, but having an agent is very important. Another thing that people often say is to refer to the Graphic Artists Guild handbook if you have it handy. It gets updated every couple of years, and it always is inevitably a little bit outdated, but sometimes you just need a benchmark to start from. Another thing, ask professors and colleagues. Your professors at WashU are one of your greatest assets when you leave school. Also, build a community and reach out to people. One illustrator I know regularly DMs illustrators that she admires and just has conversations with them, and then they become her friends. Share costs. So I have a small group of illustrators that I actually share numbers with. We talk about what we're paid, how much we're charging, how much we ask to negotiate for, and that is just really invaluable. I know we kind of some people talked about working it out using an hourly wage, excuse me. So, people have talked about the pros and cons earlier today, and I just wanted to say that because you don't know how long things take when it first starts out, that's pretty difficult. And also your hourly wage should be a moving target. So maybe that's something that you should do later on in your career. Another thing, think about potential expenses or costs to you for this project. Does it require a lot of research? Does it require you to buy something that you don't have already? Also, opportunity costs. What could you be doing instead at the same time instead of spending time on this? Like if you have a potential job somewhere, what would you be earning there instead of spending time working on this project? As for bargaining, art directors I've heard a lot of conflicting information from art directors who've been open enough to share how they feel about bargaining and like negotiating prices upwards. And I've heard everything from someone saying, if you don't bargain, that's your loss. They fully expect you to asking, to another art director who felt strongly that you should never ask for more than 10 to 15% or maybe 20 at most, and that like asking for more was egregious. So I think that, art directors are going to be as different as like, any group of people. And you're just going to have to get comfortable and figure out what your own, bandwidth for kind of making these requests are. All right. So do you have someone that does your accounting? And if so, are there any pros or cons? Sorry, I'm just going to keep an eye on the time. I do have an accountant. And the reason is because when I first started out, I did not know what I was doing for my taxes. And in fact, after I got an accountant, I found out years later that I had done them incorrectly. And so an obvious pro is doing your taxes correctly. They do get really complicated as a freelance illustrator. Another pro is that anything that lets me spend more time on work is good. Cons are a deeper understanding. It's good to know how and what to expense, because expensing things, anything from your home studio to your internet and to my New York Times subscription, it really cuts down on my overall taxable income. I should probably be faster. Is there a specific formula used to make sure you're making money? In the beginning, I compared my monthly earnings against the American Greetings monthly salary, but that wasn't always helpful because I couldn't necessarily make that target. So as a simple rule of thumb, I just lived simply and worked as hard as possible. I did very careful accounting in the beginning to get an idea of the numbers you need to hit and how my spending habits affected them. And then I was able to relax a little bit more. I picked it up every time I went back through any other lifestyle changes, like moving to a new city, doing other things like adopting dogs that like changed my expenses. But I've also only ever had one credit card and one debit card, as well as one savings account. So it makes it very easy to add up the numbers very quickly and see what's going in and out. So I think of projects as buying time. Whenever a project comes in and it's X amount of dollars, I think of it as saying, okay, then my life is paid for the next 2 weeks. And I think that's a good way to kind of plan out the rest of my schedule. All right. Are there things that you do outside of client work to make money, such as your own products for sale on If-House? So we talked a little bit about passive income. I used to have an Etsy shop for a particular set of prints. Now I put things on Society6 on the side, if only to field requests. But books, royalties are passive income. An advance is when most illustrators get paid in advance. And then once you earn out your advance with royalties, then the royalties start trickling in. But that's a really great way to earn money without actually having to create new work. But there is something that I just wanted to mention. I know I don't have much time left, is that I make personal work that looks like the work I want to get hired for. So when I have droughts where I don't have much work, I'm busier than ever because I'm making work that I want to get hired for. So with rock climbing and mountaineering, like when I'm free, I'll like draw digital stories that like go through my adventures and give me the portfolio pieces that I want to be hired for. Because later on, when an art director has a mountaineering book coming up, she'll be able to go to my portfolio and see like, oh, this illustrator actually has these pieces and can pull this off in a competent manner. Are there things that you look for in finding new projects you know will be profitable? There are a few things that I think that everyone should do, such as building in kill fees, limiting the number of rounds you do for sketches, finishes, and revisions. I often say like, I agree to this many sketch rounds, this many revisions. After that, we need to come back to the drawing table and renegotiate. But I wanted to also say that beyond the money, whether or not you think a job is a good idea to take on is a combination of not only money, but visibility, adding to your client list, personal interest, the quality of art director, and the smoothness of the entire process. there's a lot that goes into whether or not you should take a job. And this is something that you'll probably develop over time. Another thing is you want to work on projects that people will be excited about, because that naturally lends itself to visibility. And also, because we negotiate money from the start, we know how profitable we're going to be from the outset. It's only a question of how profitable a job is if the amount of time spent changes during the course of the project. So I think that I like to think of things in the big picture way, where you're in it for the long haul. Like, how does this project get you your next project, rather than what does this project earn you just at this moment. Okay, and I think that I should stop now.
Those were both great. I think we have plenty of time for questions from the group. So I think you could either shout them out or go ahead and put them in the chat.
I have a question for either of you, which is, so I'm a graduate student. I'm finishing this year. I'm an illustrator, and I'm trying to decide, like, I just wonder, like, how, I know, Noah, are you in New York? Is that right?
Yeah.
Where are you, and where are you at, Julia?
I'm currently in Cleveland, but I work out of Taiwan for part of the year, usually.
Okay. I'm just wondering, like, reflections on, like, where you chose to move and why. I'm really wondering, I know, like, we've been talking today about, like, making lists of who you want to work for. And there was, like, one mention of, like, where you want to live, but I'm just wondering how you picked where you want to live, how you feel about how you ended up there, and, like, if you wish you had been more intentional about it, or if you were, or whatever thoughts.
Yeah, I can definitely say something about that. So I grew up in LA before going to WashU, and I had every intention of going back. And I always thought American Greetings would be like a quick pit stop, but I ended up staying in the Midwest. I went to Chicago and back to Cleveland, and I'll soon be moving to Seattle, all the while going to Taiwan in the winters. And as an illustrator, it doesn't really make a difference. You can work anywhere. Like I go on random trips and I work out of hotel rooms, like in the morning and night when everyone's asleep. But I do have to say that, we've talked a lot about how meeting people does help, and it helps you to create connections. And as long as you can find a way to do that, no matter where you are, then you'll be fine. But if being in a place and meeting people physically is your forte, then maybe you should live in a bigger city. It's not, like, I think the way things are right now with social media and how open everything feels, I think that anyone can make it work.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And I also think this has kind of showed us, like, how remote friendly most creative working situations are. So I mean, being in New York, I think it's been nice because there is a community here to an extent. But especially after this year, I sort of feel that maybe it's because I already, like, have a bit of a footing. I would say the community is more useful in the sense that, like, your friends are useful, which is, like, people to bounce ideas off or get thoughts on things. I won't say that I've gotten a ton of projects necessarily because I'm in New York. And I think that most of the people that I work with wouldn't really care if I was somewhere else.
Cool, thank you. And thank you both for being here. And I really have enjoyed seeing your work. It's really beautiful, so thank you.
Hi, yeah, I had a question for probably both of you. It goes off of kind of what Julia was talking about in your presentation about negotiating for price with an art director. And I was just wondering if you kind of had maybe just like a magical phrase that you kind of go back to, say if you would like to negotiate. Just kind of curious what that might be, and if it's like a copy paste and then change a few words and things like that.
I think there definitely are nicer ways to go about it. So one thing that I like to say is something along the lines of, I'd love to spend more time on this, or I'd love to give this project the time it deserves, right? With them understanding that, like, they are purchasing a certain amount of your time. Would they like to purchase some more of my time to ensure that this is a higher quality project? So I like to make it sound like it will benefit them.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I think also while at Medium, I'm no longer doing this, but for about my first year there, was also art directing some of the time and hiring illustrators like Julia. And I'm not, I think most art directors would maybe not be like this transparent or honest, but my team was just like very like positive vibes, and we had decent budgets. So we were able in some situations when an illustrator said, I'd like $500 for this like lead illustration, where we could say in some situations like, we can actually pay you 700. And those are, I think those were pretty common for a while. And then we started just realizing that asking an illustrator what they wanted to be paid, and having this back and forth just like took up too much time. So then we started saying, okay, it's 700 in the first email. It's always really great when a client just tells you their budget right away, but unfortunately it's kind of rare. And you sometimes have to kind of like shake it out of them.
Great, thank you. The idea of negotiating prices gives me so much anxiety. So I appreciate the tips on it.
Erin, I'll make a little plug that tomorrow morning's first session is all about negotiation, if you're able to chime back in at 9 a.m. tomorrow.
I also just want to add one thing, which is that I looked quickly at an email while I was pulling together the presentation of something that I remembered being like a great negotiation. Turns out it was not at all. It was like a year after, or I was like a year out of school or less. And I asked for so much money. I asked for like way too much money for this thing. And the guy rejected me in like the kindest way possible and was like, I don't know how I can like still have you do this project. And I don't want to compromise your like artistic integrity and all this stuff, which was really sweet. But so I asked for like, I think I said $5,000 to $7,000 for this project. And he came back saying like, yeah, this really apologetic email, like, do you think we can make anything work? Or like, could you do one direction instead of three, for 2,000? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I was like, okay, that was like, I'm not sure really what I was thinking there by going so high to begin with, but it's proof that even if you do that, like, maybe Julia, you have experience with this too, but like, it's pretty rare that somebody will just like quit on you if you ask for too much.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, if you treat them, if you do it in a courteous way, they will be nice back to you. And I think one thing is that we're all going to make mistakes, and like we all have different hangups, right? So like I was never shy about it in the beginning, but I think I was overly aggressive when I first started out. And like I didn't realize that until years later, and like kind of thinking back and being like, oh, like I was probably very like demanding, and I'm thankful that people put up with me and still hired me. And like, it took me a while to learn, like, to be a little bit like less, just like that. It wasn't only about that dollar amount, and that it was also about being like, having a good experience.
Hi, I have a question for Noah. First, I want to say I really enjoyed seeing your work. It's absolutely beautiful. And wanted to ask if you could elaborate a little more specifically on your work within the music industry, and kind of if you had any tips for someone who was kind of trying to go into that niche.
Yeah, I can start by saying it doesn't pay that well. Sorry. But that doesn't mean you can't get into it. That doesn't mean there aren't ways to make money doing it, or ways to make money doing it and doing other stuff. I'd say there are so many people making music, and at so many different levels and so many different genres. I think sometimes you might just get noticed by the right person at the right time, and there's some luck to it. But I think that before that, what you can do is sort of try to work at that more independent level, or that like friend level, and just kind of build from there. And the music community, especially niche individual music communities, like, I have found myself in this kind of like electronic music design scene, and those people just all know each other. And so if you do something for one of them, other people see it. So I think it's a scene, definitely, but it's a really big scene, and it's one that if you kind of just start at the bottom or just making things for yourself or for friends, that people will notice pretty quickly, and you can get that first like real thing under your belt and feel a lot more confident, and then realize that, you know, it's all strangely accessible to a degree once you kind of have your foot in the door.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Julia, you said you were really benefited by getting an agent for your book work. Can you speak to that a little bit more about what that experience was like?
Yeah, I can say she's probably accounted for 50% of my income over the last 12 years. It's been hugely beneficial. So it's hard to publish books, like real books, with, you know, the top 5 American publishers without an agent. You know, it does happen. So if you're, you know, kind of an all-star illustrator, you may be approached by an editor who comes to you with a contract, and it's a huge contract, and there's a lot of different types of rights that are negotiated. And you can do it, you can kind of slog through it, but it helps to have an agent to kind of parse out the different numbers and make sure that you're getting the most of it. You know, they take the standard amount that they take is 15%. Some take 30%, and I think that anyone should be aware of those. There are certain agencies that are a little bit more like they kind of like work you, and they're more about pure volume than about quality work. Agents are also really beneficial because they help you pitch work, you know. So my agent shops my work around. Many agents start out as editors or other people in publishing, so they already have established connections, and they kind of basically like know which editor to go to for the story that you're pitching, which is kind of a huge hurdle that you'd have to overcome if you weren't represented. Yeah, I could probably keep going if you had more specific questions.
No, I guess that speaks to the benefit of having an agent. Your agent approached you, right? Was that how you got your agent?
Yeah, it's a little bit unconventional. So I was illustrating a book, and the author, Jenny Han, is represented by this agent who saw that I was not represented. So she asked me if I want to be represented. The by the book way of finding an agent is kind of a little bit like what John Hendricks was talking about when you're like looking for people to send promotional materials to. You want to find illustrators who kind of do work in the realm that you do. Then you find out who their agent is, and then you go to the agent's site, and typically agents will actually say, I am taking submissions or I'm not. And then if they are, they'll often say, I'm looking for this, this, and this. So it's all out there for you to see. And you know, you just check back in every 6 months. But I think the best way for an illustrator to approach an agent is when you get that magic first call from an editor. Then you have all the negotiating power. You have an offer at your feet. You can basically show that you can be hired for projects even without an agent. And so I think like when that comes in, then you look up your list of agents that you wanted to talk to, and then you email them.
Cool, thank you.
So, Julia, when you're saying you're contacting that agent after you've gotten an offer, are you saying? I mean, are you just sort of mentioning that that's a thing you have, or are you being like? I guess could you say more specifically like what you're doing with the fact that you've got this offer?
Yeah. I mean, so I think there's 2 options. One is saying, will you represent me and on this book? So you're kind of offering them 15% of this existing project that you got without them. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but a good agent is just incredibly valuable. A good agent means the difference between a $10,000 advance and a $20,000 advance. So, and then so the second option would be saying, I want to let you know I exist. And it's kind of weird to be like, but not on this project that I just got. So you could probably find a way to do that. It's just a little more awkward.
Okay, that's great advice. Thank you.
Hi, I just want to jump in there. So I'm an undergrad at WashU right now, and I was thinking about doing something along the realm of like video production, freelance work. So I was curious, we talked about having agents amongst illustrators, but it's not so common to hear agents as far as I know for video production. So I was wondering if you might have any insight as to why it might be better for more like still life, I guess, than videos, if you have any insight on that.
I don't really know. I do want to say they're all weird little industries with their strange habits, and like the way they develop is just bizarre. And that, like, why is the music industry paid? Why does it pay in a certain way and publishing pays in a different way? Like, it feels rather arbitrary, even after having been here for so long. And so I don't think there's a good reason for your answer. Noah?
Yeah, yeah. I think what you do see in video production and in video adjacent stuff is like people being represented in some capacity by like a group or a collective that has people kind of in their like portfolio, or that attach people to certain things. I know that's super common for like commercial photographers, and I think videographers as well. So, but yeah, I hadn't really thought about whether there's actually any sort of difference because it's video or still. So sorry, not a really good answer.
Yeah, sorry.
No problem. Thank you. Sorry, wait, what did you mean by group collectives for videographers?
I mean, I think that's actually, there are illustrators too who like are just represented by, I haven't been part of one, so I'm not gonna like say this well, but like basically are just sort of collectives of artists that are all managed by the same one or two people or small company. So they then handle, like I get emails as a former art director from management companies that handle illustrators or photographers and say, hey, would you like to work with any of our artists like in this upcoming month? Here's what some of them have been up to. So I don't think that would count as an agent, but it is sort of in that realm.
So thanks so much to everybody. Looks like we're gonna just head back to the main room just for a quick wrap up, but thanks so much to Noah and Julia, that was great.